Let me describe the subject for our demo. This is the old Roman bridge at Cangas de Onis. Now, I might have pronounced that totally wrong, so please apologies. The old Roman bridge at Cangas de Onis. Lovely old stone bridge, and these rocks here in the left foreground. Lots of foliage over there on the right. I think it would make, or it does make, a very good watercolor subject, because it's going to be quite easy to lay down these sequence of values. We've got the light of the sky, we've got the light hitting these rocks. I think this photograph, when it was taken, was a bright day, yet perhaps some high clouds, quite overcast. So there's a lot of brightness in there. Bright sky, brightness hitting the tops of rocks. Look at the brightness hitting these rocks as well. And then thinking about values, where is the next darkest? Where's the sequence of darks going? Well, there's a little bit of dark on the rocks here in the shade. Maybe the light is sort of coming towards us. The bridge there is, in places, quite a lot darker than the sky. But here, just where the arch is, that's actually quite light stonework there. So there's different values within the stonework of the bridge, and different colors as well. Foliage, the ivy growing up the wall, warmer bricks, cooler colors as well. All right, so a lot of variation in there. We've got a bit of foliage, maybe quite soft in the distance through the archway, quite soft there. We have some reflections. We can see a little bit of the river. I'm going to try and move these rocks over so that we've got a little bit more of the river to play with and get in the reflection of the bridge there. Over on the right-hand side, I think there's some sort of cafe. I'm going to leave those out. There's also some sort of structure here just above us to the right. Again, I'm going to leave that out. We've got a few figures also, lots of different figures in different poses. I'm going to miss out this child figure here, but maybe just to suit the composition, just move some of those figures around. I believe the two most challenging things with this, first of all, drawing that bridge right, getting the shape right. It's sort of at a funny angle. We're below it, and we're obviously on one side of the river. We're not, strictly speaking, apart from this part here, we're not strictly speaking at right angles to it. So we're looking down the span of the bridge, getting the arch right. That's the first challenge. And then the next challenge is trying to make the rocks look fairly authentic with the structure, the texture of the rocks, and try to make this as a big part of the overall area of the painting, trying to make them look fairly realistic. Right, let me describe. So I'll be bringing this photo into shot as I go through, as I'm trying to explain things to you. Let me describe the materials, and I'll just answer. There's a couple of questions coming in. Those listening live, a couple of questions coming. I'll answer those as best I can. Paper I'm using, Saunders Waterford cold press, 300 grams or 140 pounds. It's 15 inches by 11 inches. Taped down already with tape. That's what I prefer to do. It's not pre-wetted. The paints I'm using from Jackman's Art Materials, neutral tint, burnt umber, burnt sienna, yellow ochre. That's a spring green, viridian green, cobalt turquoise, cerulean blue, cobalt blue, ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, cadmium red, English oxide, or it's like a light red, cadmium orange, and cadmium yellow, and there is a lavender and a quinacridone gold. 3 mixing wells. My water is over to the right hand side. Brushes I'm going to be using, first of all, a large or fairly large mop brush. This is a squirrel mop brush size 14 from Jackson's, and then a couple of synthetic round brushes, hopefully with a fairly good point to them, and a little rigger for doing maybe a little bit of detail on the bridge and some of the cracks, crevices in the rocks. Right, so before I start doing the drawing, I'm going to go through the complete painting process with you, and it is my particular way of doing it. And those of you on Patreon, you can either, of course, paint along with me, or you can just wait till the recording is ready for you and paint in your own time. We'll do both if you want to. So my particular process, you may differ, whatever which way is you're more comfortable with. And my particular style, you don't need to paint in my particular style. Those of you on Patreon, you could do line and wash, any other style you want to. Right, let me just answer these questions coming through. So Betty, I'm worried about everything, but especially the color and texture of the foreground rocks and the big figure just in front. Well, we're going to miss out that big figure there. It doesn't look right from a composition point of view. Great from a photo point of view, but not from a painting composition point of view. Lefteris, Tim, in an overcast theme like that, do you convert it to sunlight always? Yes, I do sometimes. I have done on a few other demos, Lefteris, where I'm trying to, where it's particularly flat. And in the UK, sometimes we get lots of dull days. So sometimes you have to use a little bit of artistic license and imagination to bring in some darker shadows and light to make it more interesting and appealing. Ravi, I wonder if you find the current Winsor Newton mop brush better than Raphael, which you always used to use earlier. It's softer. I still use my Raphael brushes. There's a size 4. There's a size 6. I still use those. But I'm liking, at the moment, I'm liking the softness of this brush. These hairs are going to be softer than the more synthetic hairs of the Raphael. And the most important thing with a mop brush is getting that edge, getting that nice edge there. All right, nice point to it. And then hopefully, if it's a new brush, getting a really good point as well. That's not brilliant, this one. As the brush ages and with treatment, you do invariably lose the middle hairs of the brush, so you lose that kind of very crisp point, but it's all right. Yeah, thanks so much, Ravi. Right. Let me start with the drawing then. I'm going to be using, if I can find my pencil, I'm going to be using a 2B pencil for this outline drawing, and I'm just going to draw in the major shapes of the bridge, the edges of the rocks, the figures I'm going to include, and maybe a little bit of the foliage, and that will probably be it. Now, is there a focal point in this? Well, there could be some people as a focal point over here on the left-hand side. I'm going to start by drawing in the bridge, and from the left-hand side, I'm trying to think where the top of the bridge, the middle of the bridge is going to be, that apex there, just right of that center line, okay? So if I start somewhere around about there, and it does rise a little bit up to that middle point there, and then it slopes down just a little bit more steeply than on the left-hand side. The archway, that's the middle of the arch, and then left-hand side of the arch, the right-hand side of the arch, and we'll try and make these two halves, try and make this archway look symmetrical, but of course we're a little bit below it and looking up underneath it. So the dark underneath part of the bridge, and then the right hand side of that arch like that. Now coming over to the left hand side, there's another smaller arch, something like that. In between the smaller arch and the main arch, there's a little tiny, I'm not sure what it does, but there's a little sort of half circular arch. And there's a sort of almost like a support to it there. And the base, the bottom of that little tiny arch is almost in line with the top of that left-hand arch. So top of that left-hand arch, go over and there we are. And then the far side, and all of this will be in shade. That's going to be in shade. On the right hand side, there's another arch with a pointed top to it. So we go around about there. Now I think the height of that arch is pretty similar to the height of this one. So a point, and then the left-hand side and the shadow underneath that, darker at the top, a little bit lighter towards the bottom, likewise here. The main arch, again, darker at the top, and it comes a little bit lighter as we come down the side. I think the sun is, I believe it's coming towards, we may be looking sort of south that way, might be wrong. The archway over this side has also, we can just see a little bit of the underneath of the arch, something like that. Rocks. Now I want to move the rocks a little bit, the edge of the rocks over a little bit, so that we can just see more of the river and we can get in a bit more of the reflection of the bridge. Just bringing down the right-hand side of this arch a little bit to the water's edge. And then there's some rocks and and so on down there. The angle of the far shore, it goes up a little bit like that. And then we've got the reflection of the arch coming down. These rocks then on the left-hand side, a jagged top edge to it. There we are, that's the left-hand side, and it's sort of level here, but there's little tiny, it's sort of a wavy top surface to it, and then it comes down a little bit here. And then on the right-hand side, rising up, is another rock with a bit of a rounded top to it, but there's some nice light hitting the top of this rock. Like that. Now let's just continue the river, the far side, up. And then the tree line goes up like that. Just strengthen up some of these lines. Top of the river bank is there. There's a tree there, more distant trees just beyond the bridge, just about there. There's a bigger tree on the left-hand side, which comes down and hits the bridge somewhere around there. And there's some little figures on top of the bridge. They could be quite nice, actually. A light figure against a darker background. Tiny bit of a focal point. Maybe have a couple of figures up there. Now, down on the rocks, let's have a couple of figures here. Where will be a good place for some figures? Maybe these two would be a good example of where to place the figures. Again, those two are quite good. They're light figures against a darker background. Again, you could have a lighter figure here against a darker background, but just be careful with things in the middle there. So let's have a figure there and a figure here. I'm basically copying the female and male figure in the photo. This figure has a bag. There you are, female figure and male figure. They're having a little chat about what they're seeing and what to do. I've made the male figure a little bit more portly than than the photograph. Apologies there to that figure. And maybe just a tiny bit of a light shadow below those, just to connect them to the surface of the rocks. And so there's that figure there, and female figure, so female, male figure. There we go. So we've got 5 figures, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can put more in if you want to. Just to, oh, I need that circular little opening here, which I guess is matching that one over on the right hand side. So that will be around about there. It's a little bit lower than the one, and to me it looks circular. Again, darker at the top, lighter towards the bottom. And just one final little bit of detail on the bridge. There's a light band of rock, a light band of blocks or bricks or something. Looks to me like there's some little lines, gaps between those bricks, but that light line is about that sort of thickness, and then down on the right hand side like that. I haven't drawn in the ivy growing up the side of the bridge. Just leave that out for the moment. There looks to be there's some sort of strengthening part of that bridge there. So that's going to be dark, light rocks, a little bit darker here, a little bit darker there. And just a tiny bit of detail for those more distant rocks by the water's edge. And there's some of them that are lit up. We have a bit of a reflection for those as well. Okay, double check the drawing. Make sure this is all correct as best we can before we start painting. Yeah, I think that's all right. Okay, let me just see if there's any questions before I start painting. So my next stage will be, just answer this question. Tim, are you deliberately leaving out the parasols on the right? For me, yes, I'm missing out those parasols, but if you want to include them, it's entirely up to you. For me, they're not really contributing anything to the painting. Maybe if they were over here, that might be something more interesting. It's too far. For me, it's too far on the right, too much detail over there on the right. Right, painting steps. Start with a sky, pretty much cover the whole paper down to the rocks, preserve the lights of the rocks, then get in a little bit of definition on those rocks. Start putting in some softness as the sky is still damp. Get in some soft background trees in here. They've got a soft edge. Want to try and portray the lighting of this day. Then it will be the bridge, basically. bridge is the next darkest area, followed by the foliage, and then the darks. Well, we got the dark shadows underneath the bridge there, and these arches as well, a little bit of darkness to the rocks and those figures. That's going to be, I think, my process for this one. Start off with my trusty squirrel mop brush and a very light sky. It's almost white, but not totally white. So I want something very weak. Let's mix up something very weak, a little bit of cerulean blue, perhaps a tiny bit of burnt sienna, but a little bit of cerulean blue. So a very weak blue, and then basically cover the whole top portion over those figures. Come on down over the bridge. Could add a little bit of burnt sienna on the bridge, and then down to the almost to the edge of the rocks. We'll have that figure there quite light, and a little bit of sky showing through the archway. Again, we could have a little bit of underlying burnt sienna over there. And then down to the top of the right-hand rocks. There we go. Now, a little bit of light shade for some of the rocks. A sort of light grey. I'll stick with this, a blue and a little bit of burnt sienna, a little bit of cobalt blue. And this is where we can just, where I see it, I'm looking at the photo for a little bit of inspiration. So I'm using the edge of this mop brush just to create these shapes that I'm seeing. And then coming down to this little sort of crevice here, where the rock gets a little bit darker. As I say, I think the light is coming towards us. And then the rocks on this far side. Now I want to get in some of these background trees while it's still quite damp, so quickly mix a cool green, bit of yellow, bit of a blue, and because I'm painting into a damp surface, I'm getting that soft edge. Just those distant trees. Maybe just a few over here as well. Just a few there peeping over the top of the bridge. All right, we'll let this dry a bit, and then I'm going to go in with a darker color for the bridge. So kept all this quite light. We're getting a little bit more detail for the rocks later on when this is dry, just the little sort of darker crevices and the little cracks in the rock. But I think it looks all right so far. That right level of detail there. So feeling of light, hopefully just starting to show. Right. I need to let this dry before I start painting. I want a bit of a hard edge here, and it's nearly dry now. Let me just see if there's any questions. Those listening live? No? Okay. Just check this again. Actually, that's drying quite nicely. All right. So rocks. Sorry, the bridge here. Actually, it's a little bit damp down here, so I'm going to use my hairdryer just to speed up the process. Excuse the noise, everyone. I've got it hooked up below my drawing board. There we go. Right, excuse the noise. For the bridge, I think I'm going to stick with this mop brush, but be a little bit more gentle than when I was doing the sky, because I want to introduce some subtle variations in the bridge of some warms and cools and just suggest some of the stonework. If I just bring back my source photo, because it's quite light there. It's a good bit darker here. We've got these sort of staining almost, like a sort of grayish, cool gray coming down there. Then over on the right-hand side is a little bit warmer, a little bit darker towards the top, but we've got this light border around the arch. So yes, just trying to introduce a little bit of variation, smaller brush marks. And I'm going to start from the left-hand side because I'm right-handed. Start from the left-hand side, work my way over to the right, mixing different combinations of blues and browns. Well, let's just use my staple ultramarine blue there, a little bit of burnt sienna. Start off with a sort of 50-50 mix, but if I want to go cooler, I can add in a bit more blue. Tiny bit of burnt sienna, bit more blue. And then starting from the left-hand side, just see what it looks like. It is going to dry a little bit lighter than this. So you can see I'm alternating these values and colors as I'm coming down, and a little bit of variation also in the ratio of water to pigment, and I can just lift off a little bit. I can dab in some more pigment up the top there where I've just been, just to try and create those little bit of variation, trying to create the effect of that stonework. A little bit darker as I come down to these rocks here. And then with the edge of my, define the sort of jagged edge to those left-hand rocks. Keep working. Go over the, maybe a little bit of yellow ochre. Get in that crisp edge and paint around this archway. We can see the sky beyond. Sorry, there's not a lot of commentary for me as I'm doing this. I'm going to paint around the two figures. So I'll keep my options open as regards how I'm going to do those. Down to the top of the rocks between those two figures. Let's go over to the guy. And then that left-hand side of the bridge. Let's continue over the top here. A little bit more intense at the top. It's going to show up against the brighter sky a little bit more. There we are, over to the halfway point and back down the other side. Need to go a bit cooler. Doesn't need to be a perfectly straight edge, because that could give us a little bit of a sort of quirky feeling to the structure. And then around the lighter area, and then warmer over this side. Down to, well, where those parasols would have been. Down to there. There's the shadow underneath the bridge. And then down to the base. Let's just get in a little bit of the side of the right-hand side of the arch, and it's quite light as we come down to the water's edge. So this is all still a little bit damp here. I can still go back into it, add in some darker colors, add in a little bit of water to get those little blooms appearing. You could try and do a little bit of splattering as well, just to give the impression of the stonework. But don't overdo it. Okay, right. Next is going to be more of the foliage. Well, I've started doing it there. That's the distant foliage as we look through the arch. Foliage, we've got this big tree that's creating a nice edge for the top of the bridge there, and also do a bit of negative painting around those figures. The foliage through that archway, continue the trees up the right-hand side of that bank, and then do this right-hand bank as well, and that tree. That's the plan. Oh, there is a nice little bit of a tree showing there that could come in on that right-hand side. That might be an idea. I'll think about that later. Okay. As I did with the bridge, because I'm right-handed, I'll generally work from left to right, and this is a little bit drier. That's still quite a bit wet over there. Starting with this tree here, mix a fairly dark green. So start off with a blue, ultramarine blue, a little bit of the yellow, could add a tiny bit of red, just a tiny bit, and blue and yellow and blue and yellow and blue. It's got to be darker than this side of the bridge here. So a little test. Let's go darker still. If it's not dark enough, I could always use a little bit of neutral tint down towards the base there. But the canopy starts off lighter, then it gets darker towards the top of the bridge. Now, the actual outside of the canopy, I'm using the side of the mop brush here just to, and there's not too much paint on the brush, so just lightly touching the surface and dragging it down, and hopefully with the rough surface of the paper we are getting the impression of the lightness of the outside of the canopy. And then we are getting a bit denser as we come down to the base of those trees. And I just lost a little hair there, doesn't matter. Pick up a little bit of neutral tint to go a bit darker, bit of that blue neutral tint. Don't go too dark with this. I might have gone a bit too dark. Just wash that off. Blue. Could leave a little bit of a light edge to the top of the bridge, just where the light is just catching the top in places. And then carefully over to my figures and draw around those head, shoulders, over to the second figure. And then continue on the right hand side. So just over to the right hand side like that. There we go. And like the bridge, I can just go back into that shape and add in a few little dabs of paint just to let watercolor do its own thing. Might create a few little tiny blooms in there, which will give us more of the effect of the texture of the foliage. Right. Underneath this arch here, now that's, again, it's quite dark that side, but a little bit lighter over here. I guess as it's just catching a bit more of that light coming towards us. So start off quite dark. We come down to the top of the rocks again. And in places we can actually see a little bit of the sky. Over to the right-hand side of that arch, down to the tops of the rocks. Paint around this lady's head and then around this figure that's just coming out from underneath that arch. There. Okay, through the main archway and these dense trees in there coming down to the water's edge. These are darker, harder edge. Harder edge to them. I'm using my fingertips just to move the paint around or just lift it off a little bit. And there are a few little, there's a sort of rocky shore just down by the water's edge. Now up to the right hand side of this arch and creating a bit of definition for that, like that. We can see a little bit of greenery through here. And the value of this greenery is very similar to the value of the bridge to the side of it. A very light and yellowish tree on that side, which gets a little bit darker. Pick up a bit of neutral tint, gets a little bit darker towards the base. And there's a little bit of greenery, of course, going along the rocks, quite a bright green. Oops, too much paint on the brush. Quite a bright sort of green. So like I did with the light rock shadows, just use this mop brush, the side of the brush, just to indicate here and there little bits of foliage, moss, lichen. Pick up a bit of viridian green here. There's sort of, yes, I guess it would be sort of like a lichen. And you get sort of green lichen and golden lichen, all sorts of different colours. Now I need to do the foliage coming down to the river here, and then we'll do a little bit of ivy growing up the side of the bridge. And then I'll stop to see if there's any questions. Right. Again, different shades of green suggest the sloping of the riverbank, and a little bit darker as we come down to the water's edge. So I've picked up a bit of neutral tint. Don't make it too, as I said before, don't make it too dark though. Over to top of those rocks there. Let's have something a little bit darker underneath that tree. Maybe a suggestion of some parasols over there. Right, ivy growing up the bridge. Not too much. I'll use my mop brush again. I just want to use a soft brush because I don't want to damage the surface of the stonework there. So just a light touch on the surface. And the ivy sort of is quite thick towards the ground, but then it's sort of radiating out here. There's little patches of green in random spaces on the bridge. There. Right, next. Oh, there's a question. Hang on a second. Right, question from Reed. Tim, this bridge has a cross hanging under the center of the span. Hard to see this in the reference photo. Will you include it as a detail at the end or leave it out? Oh, I see what you mean, that cross there. I thought that was like a little church beyond it, but yes, it is. I'm actually going to leave it out. But please feel free to, now that you've pointed that out to me, yes, there's a cross there and it is hanging from the middle of the bridge. Yeah. No, I thought that was like a mast or something just beyond the bridge. Telegraph pole or something like that. So I did, my fault, I missed that one out. Right. Don't overdo it with the green. Next is, well, let's do the reflections. Do the reflections here. Soft reflections. Now, these, we can only see a little bit of the river in the photo, so we've just got to use our imagination really, extending this further on, but it's actually a little bit darker near the water's edge, and it gets a little bit lighter down towards the bottom of those reflections. So I'm going to start by covering the whole area with a bit of a wash first of all, and there's too much water, a little bit of a wash, so I'm almost wetting the surface up to the edge of those rocks. And then up to the edge of those rocks. We've got the reflection of the bridge there. And then I need to go in, I'm going to use a synthetic brush now. I then need to go in a little bit darker with these reflections. So wet in wet here. There we are. I will add in a few little horizontal lines here just to suggest, when this is a bit dry, just to suggest a bit of movement in the water. Right, next, dark. Some darks underneath these archways. That's really hopefully then going to give the bridge a bit more form to it. Now, I need to go quite dark with this, well, certainly dark at the top of the spans, and then go a little bit lighter as I come down to the bottom of the arches. So ultramarine blue, a little bit of neutral tint, and starting with this left-hand one, first of all. Doesn't need to be perfectly straight edges to these shapes. Right, the little one here, careful not to smudge my reflections. The little one here, there we are. And then the main span. Now there's just a few little dark objects on this side. I'm not sure if it's something growing on the left-hand side of the arch, but it's creating a little bit of a definition to that left-hand side. Now, as we go to the top, we're just starting to see more of the underneath of the bridge. Hopefully I can still see my lines, the drawing. So I need to be very careful. Now, as I'm coming down, I'm going to go a little bit lighter. So I've added a bit of water to my mix just to go a little bit lighter. tiny little circular arch here. And finally on the right hand side, that one there, again dark there, a little bit lighter as we come to the bottom. Right, figures, and then a little bit of detail to the stonework to just create a little bit more interest to it. Figures then. Let's start with some flesh color. I'm still using my number 8 synthetic, and some sort of flesh color. Maybe have a little bit of color on these people on the bridge. There, and then this figure, we assume this one is coming towards us, and then lady, then this male figure. Oh, and they've got some shorts, haven't they? So some legs, clothing. This lady's got some ginger hair, so pick up my cadmium orange. And a bit of alizarin crimson for her top. That's too dark. A little bit lighter. Then a blue top for this guy here. And a little bit lighter for his shorts. And then the lady's got some darker shorts like that, and she's got the little handbag or little rucksack over her shoulder. And then just a little bit of shadow for just a bit of light shadow, just to really connect them with the ground. This figure here, let's just have this one a little bit darker. Now, to pull it together, I want to try and add in a little bit more detail for the stonework and the crevices on the rocks here. Start off by, so down here on the right hand side, there's some darker marks here, mainly sort of vertical marks. So just a few little darker areas. Let's pick up this dark color here, add a little bit of a blue to it, and so I'm looking at the photo, trying to get some inspiration. Not too much detail on this right hand side. Right, I'm going to change to my rigger brush now for a little bit of detail for the stonework. So something dark, not too dark. That might be a little bit too dark. Pick up that blue there. And then just in places, create a few little lines just to give the impression of the stonework. Just continue over here and there. And there's some lines coming down there. There's the little bit of definition to that side. This is where with this sort of brush you could put that cross in there that's dangling from the underneath of the arch. So a bit more definition to this side. Perhaps few little lines on the surface of the water here. And over to the rocks. I'm not sure what sort of rock this is. Is it limestone or something like that? But you just got all these little cracks. And then on this right-hand side, there's some darker patches of lichen. Bit of darkness against the light of the relative light of that reflection. And then finish off over on the right hand side here. Just go back to my smaller synthetic brush and add in a bit of shadow to create some shadow on the clothing. Maybe this guy's got some sunglasses. There we go. A bright day. Don't want to put too much detail into those figures. I don't normally do really detailed figures. Try and keep them fairly loose. Don't want too much detail in that area because those rocks are quite some distance away. Few dry brush marks on that side where I see sort of like a staining coming down the side of the bridge. I think we're nearly there. It's just really pulling it all together now. Let's have a bit more shadow over there, and then coming down into this little indentation. A bit more down there. Okay, do I need to do anything more? Well, I'm starting to scratch my head and thinking, what else can I do? That could be an indication of knowing when to stop. There's a few more little lines there. There we go. I think I am done. I might just, with a rubber, just rub out some of these pencil marks in the lighter areas. That might just create a bit more light and a sharper edge. There we go. Along there and along here. Good. Oh, this ivy here has got sort of little layers to it. As the ivy grows up and it sort of flops down, it creates that bit of shadow underneath it. I'm not going to bother doing the foliage over there, but in the top right corner, but you could put a little bit of foliage. I personally don't think it needs it, but that sometimes can be quite a nice idea. It could balance up that darker shape there and just something in the foreground to sort of frame that right-hand side. I sometimes use a saw brush for doing foliage like that, a well-loaded saw brush, and then just with brush marks like that, you create the feeling of foliage and twigs and branches coming down. Right. Okay, let me just answer any final questions you've got, and then for Patreon members, I'll describe what happens next. So, should the person in the background have legs? Well, I've got, if it's that person there, I've got the rock sort of coming over this way. So they're just sort of, they're a little bit lower. My figure's maybe a little bit further on than those two. So you could have legs if your rocks are a little bit lower. Good question. And read, should the figures standing on the bridge have a touch of color? They could do. I'm going to keep them quite bright. If you look closely at the photograph, that I think that's a lady, and she might be maybe got a yellow top. I'm keeping mine quite light. I went over with the sky wash earlier on, so they're not white, they're just sort of off-white, so to speak. So they could have a little bit of very faint color read, but you want to think about the values there to have them showing up. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed watching that demo. I'll catch up with you on the next video.